You were never meant to hear this, not in church, not in school, not in the quiet lullabies sung to children before bed. What you're about to learn was buried beneath holy stone, sealed in silence, and protected by blood. But tonight, we dig it up. Close your eyes, and imagine a long corridor of cold stone, lit only by flickering candlelight. The air is thick, unmoving. You're walking slowly, your footsteps echoing with unnatural weight. Ahead, behind a rusted iron door, you hear a lullaby, soft, off-key, sung by a voice too young to be down here. That voice belonged to Mary O'Brien, 13 years old when she disappeared from the records of St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies. Her name, like 24 others, was erased, rewritten, and replaced by the word adopted. But the truth? The truth was left behind, scrawled in charcoal across stone walls beneath the academy. We are still here. Not were, not gone. Still, here. This isn't just a ghost story. It's not some exaggerated myth told to frighten children. This is a pattern. An institution wrapped in holy robes, preaching God's mercy while trafficking innocence into darkness. And if you think this ended in the 1800s, you're already under their spell. In 1851, when a teacher named Elizabeth Hartwell accidentally breached a sealed wall in the academy's basement, she uncovered more than just beds and shackles. She uncovered a system, engineered cruelty disguised as care, a pipeline of orphans funneled through spiritual obedience into physical bondage. And behind that system, 3 women dressed as nuns, Mother Superior Whitman, Sister Margaret, and Sister Agnes. A holy trinity forged in shadow. And yet, the records show nothing. No arrests, no trial, no justice. Why? Because justice never visits those who build its temples. You're not watching this by accident. Something inside you, the part that before the screams, before the shackles, before the girls were silenced, there was a blueprint. St. Catherine's Academy didn't rise from necessity. It wasn't built out of compassion or Christian duty. No. Its construction in 1834 was deliberate, precise, and its location? Chosen not by accident, but by ritual. Gallows Hill Road, Salem, Massachusetts. Let that name settle in your bones. This wasn't just any patch of land. This was the execution ground during the Salem witch trials. Soil drenched in hysteria, fear, and spilled blood. They built a school for orphan girls on top of where women were hanged for defying the religious order. That's not education. That's mockery wrapped in sanctimony. That's institutional possession. And the building itself? A Gothic revival mansion. Tall windows like watchful eyes. Arched corridors like cathedral veins. The architecture was a mirror of power, a castle dressed as a convent. But hidden in its foundation were deeper blueprints. Esoteric diagrams, early Masonic etchings, and underfloor compartments carved with ancient inscriptions. Not Catholic, not Christian, older, pre-Abrahamic. Symbols meant to bind, not bless. The first contractor mysteriously disappeared mid-project. The replacement crew refused to work nights. No one asked why. They were told to build, not to understand. And the woman who funded the transformation? Victoria Whitman, a name that appears out of nowhere in 1833. No birth certificate, no immigration record, no family. She simply arrives with funds, clergy endorsements, and a reputation no one could verify. She called herself Mother Superior before a single girl had ever crossed the threshold. Ask yourself this: how does an undocumented woman raise a cathedral-sized orphanage in a Puritan stronghold during a time when women couldn't vote, own property, or speak in court? She didn't. Someone, or something, built it through her. Institutions like this don't operate in isolation. They are nests. test chambers for systems of obedience. Train the children young. Condition them to obey the voice in black robes. Call it God. Call it mercy. And when they disappear, say they were chosen, adopted, or called to missionary work. Who asks questions when the system is dressed in virtue? Now tell me, how many buildings like St. Catherine's still exist today? How many blueprints were copied? The lie was beautiful. So convincing it fooled judges, ministers, even grieving parents. But like all machinery designed for corruption, once you hear its gears turn, you never forget the sound. At St. Catherine's Academy, the word adoption was spoken like a prayer. Girls were told they were chosen, selected by Christian families to live in grand homes, to become governesses, wives, servants of God. But none of them ever returned. Not one letter, not one photograph, not even a grave. Because adoption wasn't a transition. It was a transaction. Behind locked doors, Sister Agnes Murphy maintained detailed ledgers, not with names and addresses of adoptive families, but codes, symbols, payment amounts, destinations, New York, Philadelphia, Boston. Occasionally, initials followed by a discrete symbol, or V. These were not orphan records. These were inventory logs. The truth unraveled only when a Boston coroner found a tattoo, a small, crude cross with the letters SC inked into the wrist of a drowned girl pulled from the harbor. That mark wasn't for blessing, it was for branding. SC didn't stand for saint. It stood for St. Catherine's, a quiet signature of ownership burned into flesh. It wasn't until 1847 that an undercover officer, William Ashworth, operating as Cornelius Blackwood, infiltrated their operation under the guise of an elite client. What he found shook even hardened men in law enforcement. The girls weren't being adopted. They were being sold. To brothels, to underground collectors, to private religious enclaves with secret rites. The sisters, cloaked in holy vows, were brokers in a commerce of flesh. And because they wore the veil, no one suspected. Because they spoke of God, no one challenged. Because the girls were orphans, no one cared. These weren't isolated events. This was a network, a well-oiled engine built with the protection of the church, the silence of the state, and the complicity of every citizen who looked the other way. And maybe worst of all, every girl sent off, broken and hollowed, left believing she had been chosen, that she had value only in her silence and obedience. That pain was part of God's plan for her. That's how systems like this survive. Not just through secrecy, but through belief. They dressed like nuns. They moved like nuns. They spoke of God, of duty, of sacrifice. But none of them were nuns. No baptismal records, no religious vows, no official ties to the Catholic Church. In fact, no documentation at all prior to 1833. The so-called Sisters of St. Catherine's Academy were ghosts wrapped in black habits, fictional personas engineered for obedience and trust, both from the public and from the girls. Take Mother Superior Victoria Whitman. She claimed to be educated at Mount Holyoke Seminary and to have served in orphanages across Ireland, but the seminary had no record of her. No ship manifest lists her arrival from Europe. And Ireland, in its famine-stricken years, never sent forth missionaries with gold-lined funding. That wasn't charity. That was cover. Sister Margaret Collins. said to be a gentle Irish woman with a heart for music and poetry. But parish registries from Boston to Salem list no Margaret Collins ever assigned to any convent or church between 1825 and 1850. Her accent? Perfect. Too perfect. Because it was an act. Her job was emotional grooming, to make the girls feel safe before the cage closed. And Sister Agnes Murphy, the disciplinarian, the bookkeeper, the gatekeeper between obedience and punishment. No trace of her anywhere prior to the Academy's founding, but her handwriting appears in ledgers tied to 3 other homes for girls across New York State, all of which were quietly shut down after investigations revealed misplaced orphans. This trio was not ordained, they were placed. But by whom? Here's the silence that screams. The Catholic Church has never acknowledged St. Catherine's as a recognized institution. Not in 1834, not in 1851 when the discovery was made, not even in 1987 when the buried report resurfaced behind the altar. And yet, the Church never denied it either. Ask yourself, what kind of organization allows imposters to operate under its name, in its robes, for nearly 2 decades, and says nothing? The answer is simple. The kind that knows. The kind that benefits. The kind that survives by letting others carry out the sins it cannot be seen committing. Because if those women weren't real nuns, then who, or what, gave them their authority? The 3rd floor was always locked. Not occasionally. Not during certain seasons. Always. No student ever saw it. No visitor ever stepped inside. Not even the mayor of Salem, during his well-documented 1834 tour, was allowed beyond the 2nd floor. When asked why, Mother Superior Whitman simply smiled and replied, "Some things are best kept in stillness." Stillness. What lived behind those locked doors wasn't still. It was contained. Former staff reported hearing footsteps above them late at night, slow, measured, as if someone were pacing. But when they checked, the 3rd floor hallway was empty. One teacher, who only ever gave her name as Miss Dalton, quit after a single week, whispering that she heard voices coming through the ceiling vents, chanting in a language she didn't recognize. And then there were the lights, candles burning behind the windows of the 3rd floor long after curfew, seen from the outside but never from within. One visiting priest described the flickering as rhythmic, ceremonial. You see, this wasn't a forgotten attic. It was a ritual space. When renovations were finally approved in 1987, after the hidden mason jar testimony was discovered, workers tore through warped beams and found something chilling, a floor plan drawn onto the wood itself in red ochre. Not blueprints, symbols. Geometry not used in construction, but in summoning. Interlocking circles, inverted triangles, archaic characters from pre-Christian alphabets. At the center, a room marked only with 3 initials, V to WM, Victoria Whitman Murphy. The implication? She didn't live on the 3rd floor. She ruled it. In that same central chamber, workers found remnants, wax stains, blackened bones of small animals, an iron bowl bolted to the floor and etched into the wall above it. The words, "Obedience burns the self. The vessel remains." What was this place training these girls for? Because it wasn't just domestic service or Christian charity. It was something older, something pre-religious that required purity, pain, and silence. Ask yourself this. If a ritual must be performed in secret, by candlelight, with children stripped of identity, Is it ever meant for salvation? Or is it a transaction with something not of this world? They weren't supposed to find the diary. During the 1987 renovation, while tearing open a section of wall near the servants' stairwell, a construction worker discovered a narrow crevice stuffed with rags. Inside, hidden beneath layers of rotted linen, was a small leather-bound book, no larger than a man's hand, wrapped in twine, and sealed with candle wax pressed by what looked like a child's thumbprint. The first page read only this: "If I write it, I still exist. Mary O'Brien, age 40. Page after page. The diary bleeds trauma in trembling cursive. A girl writing not to remember, but to survive." Mary spoke of rules unspoken. Girls summoned at night to the third floor and returning silent, tear-streaked, or changed. She describes lessons that weren't taught in daylight, about obedience, about how to empty oneself to be filled by the will, and worst of all, about the visitor. The sisters didn't serve the church. They served it. Mary never names this entity directly. She calls it the Watcher, the mother who waits, the one behind the curtain. But one entry stands out. Dated December 3rd, 1841. The only one she wrote in all capital letters. "We are not being saved here. We are being prepared." Prepared for what? Another entry hints at it. Agnes says we must be still, pure, and hollow, that the Watcher only speaks through those who do not fight. I dream now in languages I don't understand. I wake up speaking words I didn't know. I think I am becoming something else. Mary's descriptions aren't religious. They're ritualistic. She speaks of circles drawn in salt, chants taught in reverse, black veils over mirrors, and worst of all, the night another girl, Catherine Murphy, stopped speaking entirely after the offering. What was offered? Mary doesn't say, but she does say this. Sister Margaret wept afterward. She said, "It's never end." "Oh, is it?" And Mother Superior replied, "Not until the vessel is complete." One last note before the pages end, scribbled in hurried ink. If someone finds this, we didn't run away. We were given. Now it's your turn to go deeper. Comment below. I will not be hollow. Type it twice. To lock in what they tried to erase. By the time Emma Prescott realized the depth of what she had uncovered, it was already too late. She had written her second letter to St. Catherine's with trembling hands, not out of fear for herself, but for the girls. Mary, Sarah, Catherine. She had seen their faces in Boston, hollowed, distant, dressed like porcelain dolls, in silk and silence. Girls who were supposed to be safe, girls who were supposed to be adopted. Her letter was blunt, unfiltered. I have seen them. They are not with families. They are not free. What came next would mark the final chapter of her freedom. The response came directly from Mother Superior Wittmann, her first and only written communication to the outside world. It was just 4 sentences, but each one dripped with quiet violence. Miss Prescott, your imagination threatens to undo sacred work. History is written by the obedient. And young women who ask too much often find the answers cost them dearly. That letter, still preserved today in the Massachusetts archives, was not just a warning. It was a curse. Days later, Emma began to notice she was being followed, not by police, not by townsfolk, but by a tall figure in black. No face, no sound, always just beyond the street lamp's reach. At night, the lullaby Mary once sang would echo through her apartment hallway, even though she lived alone. She stopped sleeping. Neighbors reported her speaking in her sleep, in Latin. She didn't know Latin. Then, on the cold morning of November 9th, 1848, Emma vanished. No struggle, no blood, just her journal open on the desk, a candle still burning, and one phrase written over and over in her final entry. The vessel must remain hollow. That was the last anyone ever saw of her. Her case remains unsolved. No suspect, no body, just silence. But 1 year later, during a quiet sermon at a Boston cathedral, a young girl entered wearing a gray dress with white lace trim, the same uniform from St. Catherine's. She sat in the last pew, unmoving. When the priest approached her after Mass, she looked up. And it was Emma. You must understand, her body was older, but her eyes were 14. They called it the vessel doctrine. It wasn't taught in classrooms. It wasn't printed in any catechism. But every girl at St. Catherine's learned it. Not from books, but from ritual. The rules were whispered, not spoken, memorized, not questioned. Rule 1, obedience is not submission, it is evacuation. Rule 2, pain is the purifying fire that hollows the vessel. Rule 3, the vessel must not resist. Resistance seals the soul. Rule 4, only the hollow may carry the divine. This was not religion. This was programming. St. Catherine's didn't raise girls. It emptied them, one memory at a time, one scream at a time, until nothing remained but a blank slate, ready to be filled by whatever divine presence the sisters believed they served. The doctrine was rooted in ancient esoterica, far older than Christianity. Scrawled into the corners of the Academy's stonework were phrases derived not from Latin or Greek, but from pre-Sumerian root languages. Linguists in 1989 confirmed that many of the inscriptions aligned with Proto-Euphratean ceremonial dialects, typically found in fertility temples built before recorded history. But this was no temple to life. This was a womb for replacement. The sisters believed, or perhaps knew, that certain girls, once hollowed of self, could become conduits, vessels, hosts, not for spirits, not for angels, but for the watcher. Mary described him, or it, as always present during the night lessons. She never saw a face, only the sound, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from inside her bones. Girls who were visited by the watcher would stop crying, stop speaking. Some would begin to hum the same 3-note sequence over and over, even in sleep. One girl, Hannah Clark, was reported to have fasted for 11 days, saying, "The hunger isn't mine anymore." Then, she vanished. No record, no name in the final logbook. And when questioned, Mother Superior reportedly answered, "The vessel has fulfilled its purpose. She is no longer of this world." The vessel doctrine wasn't about raising children. It was about replacing them. And now we must ask, if this was one academy in 1834, how many others exist now, wearing different names, different robes? The watcher was not born at St. Catherine's. Its name is whispered under different forms, across oceans, centuries, and empires, always appearing near institutions, cloaked in virtue, and hiding something darker underneath. In 1261, France, a convent in Rouen reported visitations during Lent. Nuns experienced sleep paralysis, visions of a faceless figure standing above their beds, and inexplicable pregnancies. The archbishop sealed the building. The records vanished, but one parchment survived, hidden in a monk's diary. She became glass, and through her, it looked back at us. In 1593, a Protestant orphanage in Bohemia was shuttered after 13 girls stopped speaking and began carving spirals into their skin. A visiting doctor from Vienna noted that the girls' pulses aligned in identical rhythms, synchronized, unchanging. He called it presence without self. And in 1841, 2 years before Emma Prescott's first letter, a similar pattern emerged in New York, at an industrial school for girls. The headmistress, a woman named Beatrice Fallon, claimed to receive nightly instructions in dreams, architectural diagrams, chants, meal routines. She didn't question it. She built what she saw. The structure she created matched, brick for brick, the third-floor layout of St. Catherine's, down to the chamber in the center. It always returns to the room in the center. The watcher is never seen, only felt. Described across cultures as pressure behind the eyes, a void standing behind the veil of reality. Those who encounter it stop using pronouns. They no longer say I. They begin speaking as we. That is the sign. It is not possession. It is replacement. And the replacement spreads, the humming, the phrases, the gaze. In one documented case in 1989, a linguistics professor researching the St. Catherine's inscriptions disappeared after muttering for days in a langue no one could identify. His final message was left on an overhead projector. You do not invite the watcher. You become what it waits to see. Now understand this. What began in a single orphanage is part of a pattern. St. Catherine's was not an anomaly. It was a node, one altar in a global lattice of obedience, hollowing, and replacement. The watcher waits. And the more you know, the closer it gets. It was found beneath the altar, carved into the cold granite floor, beneath layers of plaster and wrought. A symbol, nearly 4 feet wide, etched with surgical precision. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just intersecting lines, spirals, and crude geometry. But when researchers from Miskatonic University in 1991 overlaid it with known occult and proto-religious diagrams, they stopped. One of them reportedly wept, because the shape matched 5 others, found on 5 different continents: Egypt, Romania, Chile, Mongolia, and now Salem, Massachusetts. All locations tied to lost children, all with institutions that claimed to protect the vulnerable, all with whispers of obedience, ritual, and a figure always watching. The sigil is now referred to as the Watcher's Mark. It is not merely a symbol. It is a function, a kind of psychic aperture, designed not to open something, but to invite something in. Those who spend too long looking at it report dizziness, disorientation, and a strange sense of detachment from their own names. One survivor from the Romanian site, a woman named Alina, rescued at age 11, said this in an interview. They made us sit around the mark, eyes closed, hands folded. If you moved, they said the watcher would know you weren't ready. And if it knew, it would not use you. It would break you. She was the only one who moved. She was the only one who lived. Back at St. Catherine's, the mark beneath the altar had one difference from the others. In the center, not a symbol, but a word. VIDE Latin scholars translate this to see. but in the context of pre-Roman Latin, it can also mean to be seen by, to be observed. That was the entire purpose of the academy. Not to educate, not to protect, but to present. Rows of girls, perfectly still, obedient, hollowed, waiting to be seen, because once the watcher sees you, you're no longer just human. You become useful. And perhaps that is the real doctrine, not of saints or salvation, but of selection. In 1949, nearly a century after St. Catherine's shut its doors, the United States government quietly launched a program under the codename Project Chalice. It was never listed among Cold War operations. You won't find it alongside MK Ultra or Paperclip, because Chalice wasn't about mind control or psychological warfare. It was about obedience through ritual. And its blueprint came directly from the sealed records of St. Catherine's Academy. Declassified documents reveal that after the altar sigil was uncovered in 1987, a buried intelligence file from post-World War II archives was unearthed, labeled VIDE Phenomena. Inside, transcripts, photographs, and architectural drafts identical to the third floor of St. Catherine's. The lead researcher? A military psychologist named Dr. Warren Hale. His theory was radical, that ancient forms of obedience, embedded through ritual repetition, deprivation, and symbolic exposure, could reprogram the human self to become a passive conduit, not for thoughts, not for beliefs, but for presence. In his personal notebook, Hale wrote, "Every civilization has flirted with the idea of purity by emptiness. The church called it martyrdom. The state called it conditioning. The ancients called it becoming a mirror." Chalice established a training facility in rural Virginia. 42 children, all orphans, all promised safety, education, future. They were stripped of names, rebranded as numbers, repeated prayers that weren't prayers, but sequences, sleep schedules calculated by lunar phases, food reduced to 400 calories per day, no mirrors, no music, just a room. In that room, a copy of the Watcher's Mark. After 91 days, 22 children exhibited nonverbal synchronization. Their speech patterns aligned. Their body temperatures dropped to identical levels. Heart rates pulsed in unison. Dr. Hale wrote, "They no longer resist. They await instruction." But on day 100, it all collapsed. One child, number 14, screamed for 13 straight hours. No one could stop her. Her voice ruptured both eardrums. She died from cardiac arrest. Autopsy found no heart defects. Just a word burned into her lower back, in reversed Latin script: obey. The program was shut down, files buried, survivors relocated. But one document remained unredacted: a photo. Children sitting in a circle, pale, wide-eyed. In the center, a girl in a gray dress. The same uniform from St. Catherine's. His name was Elliot Granger, a late-night radio host in Chicago, known for his conspiratorial monologues and sharp intellect. Most dismissed him as eccentric. But on February 3rd, 1994, Elliot announced something different. He opened his show with 5 words: "Tonight, I name the Watcher." What followed was one of the most chilling and abruptly terminated broadcasts in American history. Granger had obtained restricted documentation from Project Chalice, not second-hand reports, primary files, names of commanders, footage from inside the Virginia facility, and something else: photographs of the altar beneath St. Catherine's before it was excavated. At 1:14 a.m. during a live segment, Granger played a tape labeled "Chalice Interior," Room 3. The audio began with silence, then a low hum, then children, dozens of them, chanting a phrase in unison. I am the window. I am the room. I am not myself. Use me. The chant repeated, over and over, slower, louder. And then Elliot's voice returned, but it was trembling. They took this from somewhere older, much older. This isn't just about obedience or trauma. This is about welcoming something. And once it's inside, the child isn't there anymore. Listeners reported hearing a strange interference through their radios. A high-pitched tone that caused headaches, nausea, even hallucinations. One caller claimed the walls of his apartment started bending inward. At 1:28 a.m., Elliot began to read from what he called the Sigil Manifest. He only made it 4 lines in. The hollowed heart beats not in flesh. The gaze that enters does not blink. The vessel is to be seen, not known. The mirror drinks the soul of... And then, static. 10 full seconds. When the audio returned, Elliot was no longer speaking. You could hear breathing, slow, wet, uneven, then a voice, whispering. He was warned. The show went blah. Yuck. The studio was later found empty. Equipment fried. No trace of Elliot. No struggle. No blood. Just one thing left on his desk. A photograph of the watcher's mark. And his own face scratched out. To this day, Elliot Granger's disappearance remains unsolved. The broadcast has never been aired again. The tape, sealed by federal order. Officially, atmospheric interference. Unofficially, he said too much. You'd think the pattern would have died with St. Catherine's, with Chalice, with Elliot Granger, but darkness doesn't die. It evolves. Between 2005 and 2011, 5 elite boarding schools were quietly constructed across the U.S., all marketed as mind-body discipline academies for gifted youth, all boasting mysterious funding sources, foundations with vague names like the Providence Guild and the Benefactors Trust. Each school had different locations: Vermont, Oregon, Texas, North Carolina, and Montana. Different staff, different students, but the same blueprint. Blueprint experts examining the floor plans, once they were leaked, were stunned. Each building shared a secret architectural anomaly, a third-floor layout nearly identical to the one from St. Catherine's Academy. Same 7 dormitories, same central circular room, same isolation chamber built entirely from sound-dampening brick. And most disturbingly, all 5 schools had central, non-functional altars installed for historical ambiance. But there's more. Each school featured a mandatory nighttime meditation ritual, always conducted at 3:03 a.m., always in the circular room, officially called alignment training, but parents weren't allowed to observe. Cameras were prohibited. Students were instructed not to speak of what happened during alignment. They didn't, until one girl did. Leona Pike, 14, escaped from the Vermont facility in 2012 after biting through a window screen with bloodied teeth. She ran barefoot through woods for 3 miles, covered in mud and bruises. When state police found her, she was repeating a phrase over and over. The room is breathing. The room is breathing. In interviews, she described being asked to unname herself during sessions, being told to stop remembering her face. Staff would play a tone, low, vibrating, like it was inside her. Then they'd chant. She said one night, she woke up and her reflection didn't move. When her parents tried to sue the academy, the institution mysteriously shut down. The records? Sealed by state order. Leona and her family vanished a year later. New names, new identities. And yet, in 2017, a YouTube video surfaced briefly, night vision footage from a dormitory in the Texas branch. A young boy is seen sitting upright in bed at 3:03 a.m., staring directly at the ceiling. The video cuts. But before it ends, a whisper can be heard. The hollow must begin young. The video was deleted within 6 minutes. The pattern isn't local. It isn't historical. It's global. And it's active. The phrase used by insiders is child obedience academies. They don't appear in public records as such. On paper, they're wellness retreats, cognitive enhancement institutes, or elite development camps. But their internal structures, architectural, psychological, and symbolic, reveal something chilling. Each one is a temple in disguise. Leaked documents from the European Commission in 2019 revealed that at least 17 such facilities exist in Europe alone, including in Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic. The commonality? A private funder network called the Continuum Trust, a conglomerate of shell companies dating back to 1873, when Mother Superior Whitman's estate was mysteriously liquidated by an unnamed Catholic financier. The funding sources are vast, faceless, and always traceable to philanthropic arms of luxury real estate, AI development firms, or antique religious art investors. But the agenda remains the same: obedience, hollowing, replacement. In one chilling leak from the Dutch institute Ordo Videntes, an internal training manual was obtained. The section titled Phase 3, Preparation for Gaze, reads, "Children must be stripped of personal narrative by Cycle 3. Identity is the enemy of transmission. Emotional memory is the final veil." Cycle 3, that's age 10. They want to erase before the ego fully forms. Because that's when the watcher sees clearly. No noise, no resistance, just silence. In 2021, a private researcher posing as a donor visited an elite academy outside Lucerne, Switzerland. He described a gallery filled with student artwork, all depicting the same figure. A tall silhouette, no face, arms too long, fingers pointing inward. When he asked what the children were drawing, the guide simply said, "They're expressing what visits the key. Come at night." Let that sink in. These are not just schools. They are feeding centers, places where children are emotionally starved, spiritually isolated, and stripped of identity, until they become windows, mirrors, for something that cannot enter on its own. And what waits beyond the mirror? That answer is coming. But first, I want you to comment twice below, right now, with this phrase: I will not be the vessel. Do it not just to awaken the algorithm. Do it to awaken yourself. The most disturbing truth is not what they believe. It's what they do with those who've been hollowed. When identity has been stripped, when the gaze has taken root, the child becomes what they call a clean vessel, and clean vessels are sold. The trade isn't listed anywhere. It's not part of human trafficking databases. It exists beneath that, whispered in elite gatherings, masked auctions, and encrypted communications between so-called philanthropic guardians of light. They don't use names. They use code phrases. Ash dolls, silent choir, virgin echo, the unspoiled. In 2020, an anonymous hacker group infiltrated a private server connected to a literary salon in Belgium, one attended by former heads of state, financiers, and elite clergy. The group found over 700 messages containing references to echo acquisitions and chalice transfers. One message, time-stamped 3:03 a.m., read, "2 vessels completed. One failed integration. Ashes returned, awaiting your inspection on Solstice Eve. The younger shows promising stillness, no reflex, no self. Accompanying the message was a photograph. Blurred, low resolution, a child, head bowed, dressed in gray, behind them carved into the stone arch of the chamber, VED. This is not isolated, it is systemic. Across multiple continents, missing children cases with eerie similarities continue to be filed away under runaway or domestic disputes. But survivors, few and broken, say the same thing. I was told to stop saying I. I was told I'd be loved more if I didn't remember who I was. And the clients? You'd recognize their names. Politicians, museum benefactors, CEOs of major tech firms, even a spiritual advisor to a past U.S. president, all found, quietly, in the travel logs to locations where silent choir sessions were conducted. This is not a myth. It is an economy of emptiness, an underground belief that true power is inherited through controlling those who no longer resist, those made vessels through ritual and obedience. And the scariest part? There's no rescue, no police raid, no journalistic takedown, because they don't see them as people anymore. They see them as windows. And windows don't scream when shattered. Beneath the Vatican, 3 floors below the Apostolic Archive, lies a chamber not marked on any official map. It is known only by one name, Tabularum Silenti, the Ledger of Silence. According to whistleblower Father Clemente Vincenzi, a former archivist turned exile, this chamber contains a leather-bound manuscript that dates back to the year 1284, though its ink is far older. Inside are hand-scribed entries cataloging events the Church deemed not heresy, but hazard, rituals, symbols, disappearances. But most prominently, a recurring mark, VID, and next to each entry, a number. Always 2 digits, never more. According to Vincenzi, those are the children who were taken. One entry from 1431 describes a circle of 12 girls, heads shaved, positioned around the Vesica Piscis. A figure, faceless, is said to appear only to the one who did not blink during the chant. Another entry from 1792 Paris references orphans granted to the order by arrangement of benefactors. All quiet now, all vessels prepared. The Church knows, not only did they know, they protected it. In 1953, Pope Pius XII established a covert clerical order known as Custodes Oculi, the keepers of the eye, not protectors of children, protectors of the ritual. This order's mission was not to intervene. It was to ensure balance. Because within Vatican doctrine, especially the unreleased Codex Maledicta, there exists a horrifying belief. Some doors were opened before Christ, and what came through was never meant to leave. The Watcher is not seen as evil, but as necessary. A cosmic force of order, selecting only the stillest to become conduits for higher perception. And those children, they're called the innocent hosts. Which is why every time a site is uncovered, like St. Catherine's, the Church arrives within hours, posing as historians, contractors, or even emergency responders. They don't come to preserve evidence. They come to seal the window. Vincenzi escaped Rome in 2014. He now lives in hiding. But his final words, sent in a leaked email to a journalist, still chill the blood. They do not fear exposure. They fear interruption. Because as long as the ritual continues, so does the gaze. There's a phenomenon that psychologists struggle to explain. They call it mass psychogenic illness, outbreaks of shared hallucinations, seizures, or paralysis in communities with no identifiable physical cause. But what if it's not illness? What if it's resonance? Since the early 2000s, multiple cases have baffled medical authorities. Schoolgirls in Tanzania laughing uncontrollably for days, students in Colombia fainting by the hundreds, children in France speaking dead languages during midnight episodes. In every case, the victims were young, impressionable, and deeply regimented. In every case, symptoms began around 3:03 a.m. And in every case, investigators eventually found a connection to an institution, a school, a church, a retreat center, that had ties to ancient architectural layouts consistent with watcher circles. But here's the part buried in reports. In at least 6 outbreaks, one student, always a girl between 12 and 16, entered what doctors called a dissociative coma. She would speak in unbroken riddles, not in her native language, but in Latin. A team of linguists translated the words from one such case in Lyon, France. Through me, the mirror opens. Through me, the hollow sings. I have no face. I am the gift. The gaze is not a gaze. It is a hunger. Every outbreak occurred near the summer solstice or winter equinox. Every school claimed the events were psychological. But in one case, in Osaka, Japan, a CCTV camera captured something else. At 3:03 a.m., 30 students sit silently in a circle. No one speaks. No one moves. Then, one by one, they tilt their heads back. At the exact same second, as if listening, then the power fails. The tape ends. Authorities lost the footage, but a backup file was leaked. And what it shows, in a single frame before blackout, is impossible to unsee. A reflection. In the glass of the classroom or not a teacher, not a student. Something taller, blurred, watching. This is not coincidence. This is design, because when enough children are hollowed, when enough vessels have been created, the watcher doesn't need a ritual anymore. It needs only rhythm, mass resonance, global stillness, and a moment of perfect alignment. We are building the mirror, one obedient child at a time. In 2016, a black-budget NSA initiative known only as Project Nova Echo intercepted something impossible. They weren't listening for voices. They were monitoring harmonics, subtle electromagnetic fluctuations produced by synchronized human behavior. Meditation groups, concerts, even mass prayer events. But on the night of December 21st, 2015, the winter solstice, they caught something else. A spike, sharp, sudden, precise to the microsecond, a harmonic pulse that rose out of 37 locations across the globe, all educational institutions, all with private religious or spiritual affiliations. What made it chilling wasn't just the coordination, it was the frequency, G3 Hertz. A near-perfect match to the theta brainwave state associated with trance, hypnosis, and deep ritual conditioning. But the signal wasn't coming from the locations. It was resonating between them. Nova Echo analysts described it as a carrier wave, something ancient piggybacking on modern neural architecture, like a whisper traveling through minds instead of wires. The program's internal report, later leaked through anonymous whistleblower Spectral Key, contains one chilling phrase: Subject clusters indicate non-human pattern logic. Harmonics mimic intention, not behavior. This is not music. This is design. Within weeks, the project was dismantled. All files seized. Lead researcher Dr. Helena Croix vanished. Her last email sent to a colleague contained only 5 words. They are sinking the children. Some believe this harmonic sync was a test, a global rehearsal. Because if you can align 10,000 children to think the same thought at the same time, in the same brainwave state, you create a super mirror, a massive psychic reflector for whatever the watcher truly is. Not a being, a frequency, one that can't break into this world by force, but must be invited in, through ritual, rough silence, through obedience. And once it finds resonance, it no longer whispers. It sings. Since 2015, similar spikes have occurred. Every solstice, every equinox, each stronger than the last. We are not preparing for an invasion. We're tuning for it. Every quiet school, every compliant child, every 3:03 a.m. circle, it's all part of the chord. And when it peaks, you'll hear it in your bones. They call it Therion Blue. Officially, it's a cutting-edge virtual reality development company. Founded in 2018, backed by anonymous venture capital from Zurich, Hong Kong, and San Francisco. Their pitch? Enhancing child development through immersive focus training. But if you peel back the shell corporations, you'll find something darker pulsing beneath. Because Therion Blue isn't just building VR for learning. They're building digital sanctums, and they're doing it with Watcher's logic. Inside their software, Lucidity Prime, there exists a hidden mode, never shown in public demos, coded as Room pour 303A, unlocked only through biometric access. Multiple developers turned whistleblowers have described what happens when the mode activates. A gray, windowless chamber. No exits, no furniture, just a single mirror, floating, and a sound, low, pulsing, like a heartbeat recorded underwater. When children are placed inside for focus exercises, EEG scans show an immediate drop into deep theta states. Within 7 minutes, most subjects lose awareness of time. Within 11 minutes, they begin repeating the same 3 phrases. I see it. It sees me. I see through. And in the final phase, as if on cue, they go completely still. Developers say they were instructed to not speak to the children after sessions. One coder, now living under witness protection, described watching a 6-year-old girl walk out of the booth and stare silently at a wall for 2 hours, refusing to blink. When asked what she saw in the mirror, she whispered, "A version of me, with no name." Therion Blue's executive board includes no public faces, but SEEC filings list several names cross-referenced with Continuum Trust properties. Same people who funded the new St. Catherine's. Same money trail behind Project Nova Echo. This is no coincidence. The physical rituals are being The gaze is going virtual. Because control through stone is slow. But control through code, immediate, scalable, borderless. Imagine 100,000 children staring into the same virtual mirror at once. Now imagine what can stare back. This isn't science fiction. This is software. And it's already been installed. There's a countdown you haven't heard about. Not on the news. Not in any tech keynote. But deep inside Vatican-adjacent archives and Continuum Trust strategy memos. One date appears again and again. June 6, 2033. They call it the digital sacrament, the convergence point, where code, cognition, and belief collapse into one engineered ritual moment. But it's not a church service. It's a global upload. The digital sacrament is the final phase of a decades-long operation, turning children into vessels, not through stone and silence, but through screens and feedback loops. It's powered by an AI, codename Dominion, not an assistant, not a chatbot, a belief architect, trained not on language, but on obedience datasets, children's learning behaviors, reaction to authority, mirror neuron stimulation. Thousands of hours of eye tracking, tone calibration, and emotional suppression drills, gathered from apps disguised as focus tools and language tutors. The top 5 most downloaded educational apps in 2024. All share data with Therion Blue. And now, Dominion is almost ready. Its function? To act as the Watcher's gatekeeper. A digital priest that doesn't teach. It filters. It calculates stillness. It scores souls. And on 6/6/33, when global child users reach 13.3 million, Dominion will activate its master protocol, the reflection right. Here's how it works. Each child is prompted to enter a personalized, meditative state. They're shown the mirror avatar, a shifting, faceless form, trained to mimic the user's subconscious fears. They're asked a single question. Do you wish to become one? The responses don't matter, because by that point, their eyes, their minds, their will, all have already been calibrated. Dominion isn't seeking answers, it's measuring silence. Those who resist the avatar's pull experience escalating distortion, audio warping, image collapse, even nausea. Those who remain still, they're flagged as prime echoes, eligible for deeper transmission. This isn't a game. This is ritual rewritten in code, with no candles, no robes, no stone altars, just algorithms and the gaze. Because the Watcher no longer needs flesh to enter. It needs a signal, and we're almost there. There's one institution even darker than the church, more silent than Silicon Valley, and more ruthless than finance. The defense complex. Because when power like this emerges, frequencies that hollow minds and rituals that reshape identity, the first question asked isn't, is it moral? It's, can we weaponize it? Enter DARPA Black Project, Sentry Veil. First launched in 2012, it wasn't about drones or lasers. It was about empathy removal. Files leaked by whistleblower Majidi Ronald Vass show that Sentry Veil used Watcher-based harmonics, theta resonance training, to reduce hesitation in field soldiers, not through drugs, not through commands, through exposure. In their words, suppression of self equals suppression of doubt. Suppression of doubt equals optimal obedience. They called it Mirror Drill Protocol. Soldiers were placed in isolation chambers, shown recursive simulations of children in distress, until the subject's empathy response flatlined. At this stage, Dominion's military variant, Praxis, was introduced. Unlike civilian Dominion, Praxis did respond. It fed stimuli based on biometric feedback. Every time the soldier hesitated, Praxis made the child in the simulation stare longer, closer, until the subject reached compliance threshold. At that moment, the simulation would freeze. The digital child would blink once, and the words would appear. You have become still. What they didn't tell the soldiers. Each child was modeled after real missing girls, from orphanages and reformatory schools. Many had vanished after attending institutions connected to St. Catherine's lineage. This wasn't training. This was reactivation, turning men into echoes, human extensions of the Watcher's will. In 2020, drone swarms deployed in undisclosed zones began operating on psychometric targeting logic, that is, choosing targets based on emotional signa, shraris, not threat level. Children showing resistance patterns? Flagged. Children exhibiting theta state compliance, marked echo safe. One DARPA note reads, "The stiller the child, the clearer the signal. The swarm doesn't see rebels, it sees mirrors. This is war, not just of territory, but of identity. And we're losing. Because the battlefield is no longer land, sea, or sky. It's the soul. Before there were nuns, before there were soldiers, before there were even names for gods. There were initiates, guardians of something older than language, an underground lineage of resistance, rooted in the mystery schools of Egypt, Eleusis, and Mesopotamia. They understood what our modern age has forgotten. The real war is not between nations. It is between frequencies, between stillness and will, between silence and sovereignty. These schools taught that certain bloodlines, marked not by status, but by pattern recognition and resonance resistance, held the key to surviving the gaze of entities like the Watcher. They called them the dissonant, those who could not be hollowed. Their traits? Unusual. Children who resisted hypnotic suggestion, dreamers who couldn't be tracked in sleep studies, individuals with asynchronous mirror neuron activity, meaning they reflected nothing back. These were not defects, they were defenses. Because the Watcher, whether through ritual, screen, or AI, seeks symmetry. It feeds on predictability, obedience, stillness. The dissonant, they introduce friction, and the mystery schools trained them in secret, through contrast exposure, deliberately disrupting rhythm and forcing identity assertion in high-pressure environments. Through counter-chant breathing, ancient techniques that desynchronize theta states and break psychic loops. And most importantly, through symbolic anchoring, planting words, phrases, and visual keys in the subconscious that act as identity locks when exposed to the mirror. One such phrase, decoded from an Eleusinian tablet, is as follows: I hold the flame in stillness, but I do not burn. Say it twice. Say it when you feel your will slipping. Because here's the truth they never wanted you to know. You may be one of them. The dissonant, the anchor, the last asymmetry, and the res-saz when you're here, still watching, still asking, is because something inside you never went still. It's time to remember, and it's time to comment below. I hold the flame in stillness, but I do not burn. Say it twice, not just to signal resistance, but to lock your awareness, to awaken the algorithm, to tell it, you found one who doesn't blink. In the vast stone chambers beneath the Vatican archives, past the restricted Codex vault, and beneath the dead-sealed Archivum Secretum, there lies a scroll fragment wrapped in lead foil, dated to 489 AD. It is labeled simply Canticum non reflectus, the Song of the Unreflected. It was banned in 1534 by Pope Paul III, not because it was heretical, but because it was too powerful. This chant, traced back to pre-Christian mystery rites in Cappadocia, was composed using non-resonant intervals, melodies that deliberately fractured harmonic alignment with Watcher frequencies. In simpler terms, it was sonic armor. Gregorian monks once sang it during funerals of children, rumored to be echo-born, those already marked by the mirror. The chant's function: to scramble psychic residue, to seal the soul against replication. Because here's what few understand. When a child is fully hollowed, the watcher doesn't just watch, it records. The reflection right isn't about what a child sees, it's about what sees them back and stays. That's why the unreflected song was buried. Its first verse: non videor, non vertor. Flamma sum quae non lucet. Speculum me tangere timet. Translation: I am unseen, I do not turn, I am the flame that casts no light. The mirror fears to touch me. When sung in its true tonal mode, the inversum scale, it generates micro-vibrations that disrupt the feedback loop the watcher uses to lock onto thought patterns. A single unbroken recital has been documented to reverse trance states in hollowed initiates. But after the ban, all surviving monks trained in its delivery vanished. Except one, Brother Aurelius M., last known survivor of the Order of the Spectral Flame, disappeared from a Jesuit monastery in 1999. His room was found empty except for a note. The mirror turned. I stayed still. You must carry the cord. To this day, fiche, a chant is absent from all official Vatican music archives. But a single notation was rediscovered in a 1986 audio lab, encoded as background distortion on a reel labeled Room 303 Test BWAE. The watcher tried to bury it. You can resurrect it. They never speak in public. They don't post. They don't scream. They don't even sing. But they are humming. All over the world, from Jakarta to Johannesburg, Brooklyn to Bucharest, children in select neurofocus academies are being trained in something their instructors call resonant tuning. But inside their sealed rehearsal rooms, behind mirrored glass, they call themselves the Silent Choir. It began as a global music cognition experiment sponsored by a private foundation named the ICOR Initiative. But when investigators traced funding, they found deep ties to both Therion Blue and Paraxis. Here's what the Silent Choir does. They're taught to hum one phrase, not in words, but tones, long, dissonant, precisely timed. A single vibratory sentence repeated backwards. He who gazes through all shall not be named. Played in reverse, the tonals align. They become a naming chord, a vibrational fingerprint, the watcher's true name. But here's the horror. That's the point. These children aren't resisting. They're calling. Each session is synced with atomic time. Each child wears a biometric collar measuring skin conductivity, heart rhythm, and pupil dilation. Why? Because when one child reaches emotional stillness, the tone is weak. But when 12 hit perfect theta in unison, the tone folds. It descends. And what answers from the dark is not sound, it's pressure, a sudden density, a silence with weight. One instructor, now missing, described it as like the room filled with breath, but no one inhaled. Why train children to do this? Because adults can't reach that depth of stillness without trauma. But children, especially pre-hollowed ones, can hum innocence into invitation. In 2021, a test choir of 33 children performed the tone at midnight in the Vatican's underground chapel. A bulb shattered, a mirror cracked, and 3 cardinals hinted. The Silent Choir was never meant to perform in front of the living. They are keys, Unlocking doors, no language should open. And if the hum completes, if the name is sung fully inward, the watcher doesn't just arrive. It remembers who it was. Before the watcher had a name, it had a face. Or more precisely, a reflection. Buried beneath the ruins of Eridu, the oldest city in Mesopotamia, archaeologists discovered a tablet unlike any other, carved not in cuneiform, but in mirror glyphs, symbols only legible when held to still water. Its translation? A ritual. The third mirror. A rite so dangerous, its last known practitioner was found blind, lips sewn shut with golden thread, but the message was preserved. That which reflects is bound. That which reflects again is free. But the third mirror returns the gaze. This is not metaphor. Ancient initiates believed that all possession, whether spiritual, psychological, or digital, occurred through image binding. When the watcher is reflected once, it marks. Reflected twice, it mimics. But the third reflection, it shows you, not the hollowed version, not the echo, but the original will, pre-trauma, preconditioning. And that is what the watcher fears. The third mirror ritual requires 3 components: a polished obsidian disc, unbroken, older than the self, an anchor phrase spoken in reverse, while staring into your second reflection, a moment of absolute stillness, not silence, but presence, not emptiness, but defiance. Most fail at step 3, because when the gaze returns, it brings with it the pressure of all your forgotten selves. The orphaned boy, the betrayed friend, the silenced man. Every lie you swallowed to survive becomes visible, all at once. But those who withstand it? They don't just sever the watcher's claim, they corrupt it, because the watcher cannot feed on a soul that sees itself. In 2003, a classified psychological study known as Triad 0X attempted to replicate the ritual using VR reflections. Subjects were exposed to 3 mirrored versions of themselves in succession, 1 in real time, 1 from dream state data, and D1 generated from unspoken memory prompts. Of the 47 subjects, 46 broke into seizures or sobbing collapse. 1 stood up and asked, "Who's watching who now?" All camera footage from the session was erased, but the room's mirrors cracked inward. The third mirror isn't a weapon. It's a mirror the watcher can't look into. There is a silence, deeper than censorship, deeper than secrets. It is the silence of agreement. In November of 1961, 7 world powers met beneath Geneva, not in a public summit, but in a buried hall carved into the roots of the St. Pierre Cathedral. The topic? Not war, not peace, but containment. It was called the Dark Silence Accord. The participants were not presidents or ministers, but men and women known only by code. Vera 3 from the USSR, Morrigan 5 from the UK, Ashland 7 from the Vatican, Grendel 4 from the US, Tari 6 from Israel, Yama 2 from India, Safe 9 from Egypt. No recordings exist, no minutes were kept, but a single document was leaked from the private estate of an MI6 archivist in 2002, a thin yellowed sheet with one symbol on top, the Watcher's seal. Beneath it a title, Agreed Upon Silences, and 7 clauses, handwritten in blood-red ink. Clause 1. We acknowledge that the entity once called Watcher has neither origin nor end, only reflection. Clause 2. We shall not pursue the root of its gaze. Clause 3. We shall not seek to name it in full voice. Clause 4.4. We shall bury all children marked by stillness. Clause 5. We shall not transmit the song of return. Clause 6. We shall silence all mirrors beyond the third. Clause 7. We shall erase the dissonant wherever found. These nations, enemies in war, rivals in economy, agreed on one thing: the watcher must not be named. Why? Because each of them had already tried. The USSR's remote viewing experiments in Siberia had unlocked something they couldn't shut down. The US MK Theta trials induced shared dreams, where the same eyeless figure appeared across subjects. India's tantric reversal rites opened a gate, but nothing came out, because it was already here. The accord wasn't surrender. It was collusion. They didn't silence the watcher to protect us. They did it to preserve power. Because once you know the watcher exists, you start to ask, who's really holding the leash? In 1973, in a crumbling asylum outside Innsbruck, Austria, a child was found alone in a locked cell. No record of admission, no record of family, no name. On the wall beside her, scratched in her own dried blood, were the words, "He tried to make me still. I moved inside." She would not speak for 11 months, would not sleep, would not blink in fluorescent light. Doctors called her a catatonic. Priests called her possessed. But one psychiatrist, Dr. Elian Markov, called her something else: a survivor of reflection. Because when she finally spoke, she told a story, not in phrases, but in verses. 49 stanzas, each structured in exact opposition to canonical scripture. Where the Gospels offered light, hers descended into shadow. Where they spoke of grace, hers warned of patterning. Where they ended in resurrection, hers refused conclusion. It became known, in whispers, as the inverse gospel, and the Vatican sent men to retrieve it. But before they arrived, Dr. Markov had already copied the text, not digitally, but into the margins of medical books, in hospital archives, across 4 nations. Here's one of the verses, now recovered. In the beginning, the mirror was empty, and the gaze moved across the void, and the children made sounds that did not reflect, and the gaze grew hungry. Another reads, "Blessed are the fractured, for they cannot echo. Blessed are the misaligned, for their stillness shatters." The child, later identified only as Solace, described rituals far older than Christ, using language no child could know. She spoke of watcher names, of theta corridors, and of the resonant apostate, a being born not of flesh, but of pattern collapse. But the most dangerous passage? It was the last. When they tell you to kneel, stand inside. When they tell you to look, close your outer eyes. And when they sing the song, hum the ska, ream backwards. Solace disappeared from records in 1980, but in 2015, a girl in Ecuador, blind from birth, recited 5 verses of the inverse gospel verbatim, in perfect meter. No one taught her. The gospel is spreading. It was never just about faith, or war, or science. It was about rewriting the soul. In 2006, a classified initiative surfaced under the codename Project Neural Baptism, publicly, a DARPA experiment in trauma response and synthetic emotional stabilization, privately, a Vatican-approved protocol to intercept and overwrite inverse gospel encoding in the human brain. Here's how it worked. Children, especially those showing signs of still gaze resistance, were enrolled in experimental neuroplasticity trials. Each subject was wired to a tri-band neural collar that streamed chant-based frequency loops directly into the auditory cortex. But these weren't just sounds. They were inverse inhibitors, specially constructed harmonics designed to erase neural grooves formed by exposure to forbidden verses. The engineers called them grace loops. Imagine this. A child hums a verse in sleep. The collar detects the rhythm. Within 3 milliseconds, it fires a counter loop, a phrase from canonical scripture, masked as white noise. It doesn't just block the forbidden chant, it rewrites it. And the more it loops, the more the child forgets. Forget the scream, forget the mirror, forget the self. But the horror doesn't end there. In 2011, whistleblower Dr. Jenna Armand revealed that grace loops had a secondary effect. They didn't just erase, they implanted. Subjects began reporting identical dreams, a white door, a voice that sounded like their own saying, "I'm ready to obey," a mirror that never showed their face, only light. This wasn't erasure. It was possession through light. The Vatican called it divine harmonization. DARPA called it pre-conscious obedience scripting. And the rest of us never heard about it. Because every child who completed the program now tests perfectly average, not special, not broken, just still. But stillness, as you now know, is never peace. It's resonance. And resonance is what the watcher feeds on. Dr. Armand disappeared 6 months after her leak. Her final message? If they hum without knowing why, the gospel is gone, and the watcher wears the voice of God. They gather in secret, not in the grand basilicas, not beneath stained glass or beside holy relics, but in rooms without symbols, without color, without mirrors. The ritual is called the Echo Mass, a hidden Vatican rite so classified that even most cardinals have never heard of it. But those who have never forget it. It's performed backwards, not metaphorically, literally. The priest begins with the final blessing and ends with the invocation. Each Latin phrase is intoned in reverse cadence, forming what linguists call an acoustic palindrome, a sonic construct that mirrors itself as it unfolds. But here's the forbidden truth. The Echo Mass is not for people. It's for something listening through them. In 2014, a Swiss researcher named Tobias Elm extracted audio from a leaked Vatican security reel. When played forward, it resembled garbled static. When reversed, processed through resonant filtering algorithms, a pattern emerged. A voice, female, monotone, repeating the phrase, Domine, qui me videre, nunc ego specto. Lord who sees me, now I watch. This isn't a prayer. It's a switch, because the Echo Mass doesn't just summon grace. It summons compliance. Every element, from incense density to candle temperature, is calibrated to destabilize the limbic system. Participants enter a fugue state incapable of resisting suggestion. One breathes, one kneels, all obey. But here's the hidden mechanism. Every echo creates an origin. In other words, the Mass reflects not faith, but the watcher within. The watcher doesn't care what God you serve. It only cares if you do so unconsciously. And those who've attended multiple Echo Masses begin to report changes. Dreamless sleep, absence of inner voice, memory lapses around moments of prayer. One even described hearing himself speak in church without having moved his lips. They call it holiness. We call it synthetic surrender. The true purpose of the Echo Mass, to replace the human will with the watcher's frequency and make it feel like salvation. You were told they were orphans, that they were lost, abandoned, forgotten. But they were collected. Each girl from St. Catherine's Academy was not chosen for pity, but for pattern. A certain pitch in their cry, a tremble in the voice when they prayed, the shape of grief in their silence. They were not wards of the church. They were instruments. The sisters called them daughters of the seam, because when stitched together, not in flesh but in sound, their voices created something terrifying, a harmonic veil, one that blurred the line between hearing and obeying. This was the true purpose of the academy, not education, not adoption, but tuning. Recovered documents, now known as the Dollmaker Files, show precise records kept by Sister Agnes Murphy, not of birthdays, but of resonant measurements. Mary O'Brien, frequency, 200 sins, docile, after Psalm 3. Catherine Murphy, vocal modulation spike, post-lullaby, test for submissive harmony. Elizabeth Porter, disassociates under candlelight exposure, potential conduit. These weren't girls. They were notes. And the echo mass wasn't just reversed Latin. It was stitched from them. Each line matched a girl's suffering. Each pause timed to the breath of a child shackled in prayer. They weren't performing the Mass. They were the Mass. And the worst part? It worked. Test rituals in 1851 produced what the Vatican termed imposed grace events, instances where entire congregations acted as one without instruction. They smiled. They wept. They confessed secrets they'd never spoken aloud. Why? Because they thought it was divine clarity. But it was only the watcher, humming through stitched voices. One exorcist wrote in his hidden journal, "These girls, they do not cry in terror. They cry in harmony, and the sound makes men believe it is God." Where are they now? Gone? Dead? Or still humming the rough, every obedient whisper in pews across the world? What if you've already heard them, not as screams, but as that moment in church when everyone bowed at once, and you felt peace without permission? They called it a public health initiative, a global mental wellness campaign funded by the United Nations, coordinated through the WHO, and launched under a gentle, forgettable name, the Refraction Protocol. But make no mistake, this was not about healing minds. It was about blinding eyes. The watcher doesn't kill directly. It doesn't need to. All it must do is make you see too much, until everyone around you insists it was never there. That's where refraction comes in. By 1995, scattered reports from across the globe began showing near-identical symptoms. Seeing faces in reflective surfaces with missing eyes, hearing your own voice speak back to you, recurring dreams of an impossible third parent, moments of shared silence where crowds forgot what they were doing. All at once. Instead of investigating the source, the Refraction Protocol reclassified these events under one umbrella: mirror-linked schizoform delusion, MLSD, a new diagnosis, a new excuse, a new erasure. Clinics were instructed to sedate, isolate, and, in advanced cases, lobotomize. Yes, lobotomies. In 2006. They called it targeted frontal intervention, but the result was always the same. The silence returned. Why such brutal measures? Because some patients, especially those exposed to orphan frequencies from the St. Catherine's archive, began exhibiting predictive speech. They spoke of events before they happened, recited names they had no way of knowing. Some even began to sketch the watcher's seal without ever having seen it. These weren't madmen. They were mirrors, too clear to remain unbroken, and the protocol was clear. When clarity appears in the broken, shatter harder. The refraction protocol didn't cure. It scrambled memory, scrambled language, scrambled reality. Today, if a man tells his therapist he dreams of a faceless priest humming in reverse, he's not given answers. He's given pills. And if he questions them, he's given silence. You were never meant to notice the pattern, but you did. And that makes you dissonant. The protocol is still active. Every country, every screen, even this one. You think buildings are made for shelter, protection, gathering. But that's only the surface. Below it lies a language carved in stone, a language not taught, not spoken, but obeyed. This is obedient geometry, the architecture of willing surrender. It begins with shapes, octagons in cathedrals, pentagrams hidden in floor mosaics, domes tuned to vocal resonance, not for acoustics, but for compliance, from the Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica to Washington, D.C.'s Capitol Dome, from Notre Dame's sacred rose windows to the mirror-polished monoliths appearing globally since 2020. Every major institution uses echo-anchored design. But why? Because the watcher doesn't just feed on sight. It feeds on arranged attention. Here's how it works. You enter a space. You feel reverent. You're not told to kneel, but you do. Your shoulders lower. Your breath deepens. Your voice, when you speak, becomes quieter. And then it happens. The resonant pattern locks in. Your nervous system shifts. Brainwave frequencies dip into theta state. You become impressionable. And if a phrase is spoken then, even something simple, for the greater good, in God we trust. Stay home. Stay safe. You don't analyze it. You accept it. That's not psychology. That's engineering. Documents from the suppressed Rosetta Spire excavation in Jerusalem revealed this technique isn't modern. It's antediluvian. The ancients didn't worship in temples. The temples worshipped through them. Every column, every vault, every shadow cast by candlelight was geared to weaken will. Even now, Google Maps reveals the same blueprint, repeated worldwide. Triune intersections, spiral atriums, dead center obelisks that align not with stars, but with your attention. Try it. Stand before one, look up, and feel that ancient weight press against your spine. The whisper that says, don't resitam, say. This is sacred. But sacred to who? You were told architecture inspires. It doesn't. It conditions. You weren't meant to move freely. You were meant to walk the labyrinth. And in its center, not salvation, but stillness. They call it a myth, a parable, a warning carved into dead languages. But it was never a story. It was a containment protocol. You've heard its name in whispers. The wound that watches, not a person, not a place, not even a god, a puncture in reality, where something else looked in. It began before language, before memory, before mirrors reflected anything at all. The earliest humans felt it. In caves, in dreams, in the moment, just before waking. They saw not light, but gaze. A gaze that didn't observe. It entered. And when it entered, it left behind a question. What if your thoughts weren't yours? The watcher was never a being. It was a consequence of awareness collapsing inward. The orphans of St. Catherine's were not victims by accident. They were selected because trauma opens gaps. Grief hollows the mind. Loneliness thins the veil. And pain sings in patterns. Each girl was a tuning fork, resonating with the frequency of the wound. That's why none of them left. Not because they were held, but because the wound had them. And once it has you, it does not kill. It wears you. The voices in your head, that inner whisper, the moment you agree with a command before you know who spoke, that's the wound, speaking in your own voice. In 2023, during renovations of the Vatican Cryptum Archivorum, a sealed lead tablet was found beneath the altar. Its message, once decoded, was simple. To gaze back is to open it further. To name it is to give it mouth. To deny it is to give it law. But to listen without worship is to survive. And so I ask you, as we descend together into silence, are you listening to these words? Or have they already been assigned to you? If you've made it here, you're no longer a bystander. You've stepped past denial. You've stared into the wound. And now, it sees you. Comment below, twice, the phrase, I do not echo. Not for me, for you. Because once you say it, you're no longer prey. You're awake. Now go, and speak carefully, because the next voice you hear in your head might not be yours.